Welcome, and thank you for joining us this evening for our Genealogy Week program, DNA, Just Beyond the Basics, Adding to Your Solid Foundation. I'm Julie Parsons, Senior Assistant Branch Manager at Harford County Public Library's Bel Air branch. You're welcome to review the content of this performance since it is being recorded and will be available along with the handout at hcplonline.org through February 28th. We ask that you refrain from taking photos or screenshots of this presentation to protect the intellectual property of the art presenter. Now, let's get on with the show. We're thrilled to have Peggy Jude back with us this evening. She really is a wealth of genealogy knowledge. Peggy is a speaker, educator, and researcher who has been conducting genealogical research for over 40 years. She specializes and teaches in 5 areas of genealogical interest: DNA, genealogical technology, preserving family history and family heirlooms, genealogical methods and records, and Swedish genealogy. Peggy serves as the VP and member of the board of the Manatee Genealogical Society, where she leads both the DNA and the Technology for Genealogy Special Interest Groups. Following a successful career as a global human resources executive, she opened her genealogical business centered on the west coast of Florida. Peggy is a member of the faculty of the Institute for Genealogical and Historical Research, a member of the Association of Professional Genealogists, and the Genealogical Speakers Guild. She is a graduate of ProGen and multiple advanced genealogical institutes. Peggy will be using a PowerPoint during her presentation this evening. You can adjust what you're seeing on your screen by using the screen view in Zoom. Please feel free to submit questions via the Q&A feature on Zoom, and at the end of the show, I'll try to get to as many as I can. We would really appreciate it if you could complete the quick survey after the credits. We usually input to choose topics for our virtual genealogy programming, so it is time well spent and it just takes a moment. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Peggy Jude.
Thank you, Julie. It's delightful to be here. I'm excited to be back with all of you. If you've come to this week before, I'm thrilled to be invited back. Okay, so I have my presentation up. Somebody will let me know if there's any issues, but we're going to talk tonight about aspects of DNA that happen after you take a test and you get your results back. It builds on some of the basic foundational elements to expand your knowledge. And I think that I think of this as DNA 102, which kind of comes after DNA 101. So let's get going. Tonight I'm going to cover 3 main topics. First, we're going to delve into matches. We'll cover the basics on matches, what matches to pursue, how to analyze them. Then we'll cover some of the top questions I get in my classes in a section I call DNA potpourri. It could also be, DNA Q&A, most frequently asked questions, whatever. This is just some of the things that I get asked the most. So I thought I would cover a few of those topics. And then we'll close with some of the tools you might utilize to enhance your DNA discovery journey. These are all covered in your handout, and I'm happy to answer any questions afterwards. All right. Matches are the real gold in taking a DNA test. People take DNA tests for many reasons. Some of them have nothing to do with genealogy. They might be for health reasons or curiosity, or they got it as a gift. But if you're doing genealogical research, the match list is your best friend. It's the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, if you will. And reviewing and analyzing matches is where most genealogists spend their time and effort working with their DNA. So what is a match? Let's set the stage a bit. A match is someone who has tested their DNA and who shares a segment of DNA with you. So you only get a match if you share DNA with someone. The sequence of that portion of their DNA exactly matches your sequencing in the exact same place on the same chromosome. So it could be a match of one segment on one chromosome, or it could be multiple segments that you match across multiple chromosomes, but it has to be in the exact same place and the exact same chromosome. DNA segments are measured in centimorgans. Don't let centimorgans bother you. Centimorgans is simply a measurement factor. It's like milk comes in gallons and, roads come in miles, etc. It really just is a measurement. It's a measure of centimorgans. And measure of DNA and centimorgans is just the terminology we all use. The more centimorgans you share with someone, the closer the relationship. Matches below 10 centimorgans could be false matches. We'll talk about that a little bit. If a person appears on your match list, they are related to you, unless they appear below that 10 centimorgan mark. 10 centimorgans is kind of the dividing line between they definitely relate to you or they might not. The lower numbers, 7, 8, 9 centimorgan matches could be a false match, could be a match that is actually identical to you by chance, rather than what's called identical by descent, which is that you got it from an ancestor and so did they. So you have to be wary of those 10 centimorgan matches. And certainly, one of the things to know is that it's not that those can't be absolutely good matches. It's just that some of them aren't. And so it's hard to differentiate between which of those matches are accurate and which of those who aren't. Blaine Bettinger, who's a renowned genetic genealogist, has a great analogy he shares. And he says, if someone gave you a bowl of M&Ms and told you that 30% of them were poisonous, would you eat any of them? The answer is probably not. Unless there's some way to figure out which ones are poisonous and which ones aren't, you wouldn't take a chance. And that's what we're saying about matches below 10 centimorgans. They could be false matches, and so you have to be very careful below 10. Most of us have enough matches on our match list to not ever have to dip below the 10 centimorgan match level. That's might not be true for you, but most people don't have to fuss with the lower level matches. The companies also provide you with a range of possible relationships. They do not tell you how you're related. They just give you possibilities. And sometimes it's a range that says second to third cousins or fourth to sixth cousins. They don't tell you exactly how you're related, except for parent-child. The rest of it is all just an estimation based on numbers, and we'll look at that a little bit further tonight. Each testing company uses the same methodology, so it really doesn't necessarily matter where you test. You should get a good profile of your DNA wherever you test. Obviously, a lot of people test an ancestry because they have a largest database, so you're going to get more matches. But I will, make an argument later that you should probably be playing in all the ponds, and you should have your DNA at all of the testing companies. Matches that show up on your match list are by default in descending order of centimorgan shared. So the top of your list is going to be the people you are most closely related to, and then on down to those lower level matches. But you also need to understand that the testing databases are skewed. Americans are the predominant testers in the world, and so of course there's going to be more people with American ancestry or American experiences, which of course, because of history, tends to mean there's more European ancestry in the database. And Western European countries test as well. So you're going to get more matches that are of that Western European American diaspora. The longer time your ancestors have been in the United States, it's likely the more matches you have. Because, for example, if your ancestors came on the Mayflower, they've had 10, 12 generations to create descendants here in the United States. And because Americans are the most predominant testers, there's going to be more people in the database the longer your ancestors have been here. If your ancestors came to the United States in the 1920s, it's possible that you'll have less matches, but that's just an example. But you have to understand that the testing databases are skewed, so you understand why maybe you have more matches than someone else. Endogamy also plays a component in that, which we'll talk about a bit later. So the final principle I want to make sure you know is that DNA comes in pairs. For every match you have on one side of your chromosome, you could also have a match on the other side of the pair in the exact same location. So DNA comes in pairs. You can see an example of a chromosome, a mock-up of a chromosome here, and you'll see that on the left side of your chromosome at that lower level in the red box, you have a a strand of DNA, and on the right box you have another strand of DNA. The reality is that you could match your match on whichever side. And you could have a match in exactly the same location that doesn't match the person in the red box. So you have a red match, you have a blue match, but red and blue don't match each other because they came from opposite sides of your chromosome. Because you do have two sides to your chromosome, and your matches only match on one side or the other. Well, they could match on both if you were a sibling or something like that. But for the most part, your matches are going to be either on one side or the other. And the testing companies don't know which side and which person and how to figure that out. So sometimes you have to look at more detail, but you just need to be aware of that, because if you say, well, Sally matches me on chromosome 10 and Joe matches me on chromosome 10, so Sally and Joe must match. Not necessarily. Sally could be on one side, Joe could be on the other, even if they're in the same location. Okay, so let's talk about match lists. And we'll talk about where to start with your match lists and how to work your way through your match list. So starting the match review process, it's always best to start with your largest centimorgan matches and work down. That's because you should or could recognize the people at the top of your match list, unless you're an adoptee or something like that. These are going to be your parents, your siblings, your aunts and uncles, your nieces and nephews, your first cousins. Those are the folks who are going to show up at the top of your list. And as you work your way through your list, starting from the top down, you should be adding tags or notes. All of the testing companies provide a notes function where you can add a note. Tags would be like a color coding or some other kind of tagging. But make sure you add those tags and notes as you go. Don't look at matches 3 or 4 times. My husband has a match that only has initials. It doesn't have a name, doesn't have a tree. It's just CC. That's how they're designated as a match. I figured out who this person is, but it took me twice looking up the same person before I said, I'm going to get smart and put a note in here that I know who CC is and this is who they are and how we're related, because you just don't need to do the same work twice or 3 or 4 times. So make sure you add tags or notes as you go. You can separate your list into groups. Often you separate your list into people who match one of your 4 grandparents or one of your 8 great grandparents. You can do that with the tag, the color tag, the color dots, the notes function, whatever. But separating your list into groups is very helpful. That will help you down the road as you work on matches you don't know. So this is starting with matches you do know. But I also encourage you to focus. DNA is a rabbit hole you can easily go down. And because most of us have thousands of matches, it's easy to just get sucked into that, scrolling through and, trying to figure it out. But you need to focus, and we'll talk a little bit about how to do that. So here are the 4 rules that I suggest you follow when you're determining which matches should you pursue. Because of the thousands on your match list, which ones really should you spend your time with? And we'll talk about these each individually, but you want to follow matches that answer your research question. You want to focus on your top matches. You want to focus on matches you can pursue, ones that give you enough information to do something with, and then matches who match other people that you know exactly how you match. So others that you know how you match, those are matches that you might be interested in pursuing. So first of all, matches that answer your research question. Like all good genealogy, you should start with a research question. For example, who were the parents of Nicholas Powers, born in 1852 in North River, Newfoundland? And by the way, this is my 40-year brick wall. So if you know the answer to that question, do not go away tonight. I want to talk to you. But start with a good genealogy question. And trying to solve this brick wall question with DNA is something that I continually work on, because I'm looking then for matches who are on that particular line and in that particular location, because those are the folks who can help me solve this brick wall. But you need to know before you start looking at your DNA match list, what do you need to find out? Where are your brick walls? What locations are you researching? What time frames are you talking about? What are the surnames on that side of your tree? So kind of figure out your research question and then know what you need to find out about that research question that might be helped by your DNA matches. Next up is work on your top matches. So let's talk about what a top match is. So these are rounded, generally rounded numbers, but in general, parents and children share 3,500 centimorgans. Really, anything that starts with a 3, as in 3,000 or more, is going to be a parent-child relationship. It could be 3,700, it could be 3,200, but parents, children on average share about 3,500 centimorgans. It doesn't know, by the way, who's the parent and who's the child. You might know who the parent is and who the child is. You might be able to figure out who the parent is and who the child is by identifying the ages of the match or other people that are in the database. But the testing database companies do not know who's the parent and all the child. They just know you share this amount of centimorgans. Likewise, for full siblings, you should share about 2,600, 2,700. And so the folks who share that amount are going to be a full sibling. But beyond that, it gets a lot more complicated. 1750, for example, could be an aunt and a niece relationship, an uncle and a nephew relationship, a grandchild-grandparent relationship, a half-sibling relationship. All of those are possibilities at that level. And again, the testing company doesn't know. Some of them are getting smarter, and because of ages and information you've provided and information they can see on trees, they're using artificial intelligence to make an analysis that this should be your aunt, etc. But they don't know for sure. So if it says that it's something that it's not, don't be worried about it. They just don't really know. They're doing their best to guess for you, but that's really all it is. And then when you get below that, there's a lot more choices. At 870, it could be a first cousin or a great grandparent or a great niece or nephew or a great aunt or great uncle. Again, all of these are in that same 870 centimorgan range. So the possibilities are multiple, and they're all just going to give you a guess. First cousin once removed typically have 433 centimorgans. Second cousins are 230. Second cousins once removed are 122. And then third cousins are about 73. Again, these are averages. There are ranges. The Shared Centimorgan Project has all this detail in more specificity. It'll give you a whole histogram chart of distribution, but these are just kind of the general numbers. So when you're talking about your top matches, you're typically talking 200 and above, something like that. So you should work on those folks first and know how all of those people are related to you before you delve lower in your list. The next thing is you should focus on matches you can pursue. I mean, this is just conversation about don't knock your head against a brick wall. Work on what you can. So does the match have any public information? How long has it been since they last signed on? Do they have a tree posted anywhere? Are they on GEDmatch? Are they on another site? Are they at 23andMe or MyHeritage or Family Tree DNA? Are there someplace else? Is there something out there that gives you some information about this person so you can figure out who they are? The more information they've provided by filling out a profile or posting a tree, or even indicating to you their level of genealogy expertise, all of those things can help you focus on matches that really might get you somewhere. So focus first on the matches that you actually can pursue. And then the last tip is to focus on matches how you're related. And this is really understanding what information you already have that you can leverage. So what family members have already tested where you know the connection, right? So if you go out there and you look at your match list and the top few matches, there's my second cousin, there's my first cousin, there's my aunt. Okay, you have some people who you already know, and you can leverage those relationships to figure out a match and who a match is. For example, if the match also matches your aunt, you share with, they also match your aunt, which is in shared matches. Let's say it's your mother's sister, they already match your mother's sister, then that match is likely on your maternal side. It's a maternal match. So that automatically eliminates half the possibilities because it's not on your father's side. Now, yes, people can match you on both sides, but for simplicity's sake, we're just saying let's say they only are a match on your mother's side. and therefore that takes away 50% of the possibility. Second cousins actually take away 75% of the possibilities, because second cousins are related to you through a grandparent, one grandparent, and they're also obviously related to that grandparent's parents. So you have two great grandparents. But one grandparent out of four helps you narrow down how someone could be related to you. So this is all about leveraging the people you know how you're related to, and using the shared matching tools and clustering techniques and those kind of things to identify how your match is related to you. And you can enhance this with targeted testing. That's why we suggest to people that they test their first cousins, they test their aunts and uncles, they test other people in their family, particularly targeting those lines where you're trying to do research. So I have gone out to some of my Powers cousins who are out there, because that's my brick wall, and said, hey, will you test for me? Because I'm expanding the pool of people I know how I'm related to in order to break through that brick wall further and attract more matches. Because some of my cousins are going to be related to people I'm not related to. And we'll show you more about that here in a minute. So I'm going to walk you through analysis of a match. I'm going to give you kind of a step-by-step process. It's in your handout of how to analyze a match from the beginning to determine how someone is related to you. So let's take a look at how you might walk through analyzing a match. Really, this is all about squeezing out all the juice you can, and making sure that you've really identified all the components of a match. If you were to be looking at a census record, for example, you wouldn't just simply look at names and ages. You'd look at where they were born. You'd look at other information on a census, like how many children do they have, or how long they've been in the United States. You would look at all the pieces of information on the census. That same thing is with DNA. Don't just say, okay, it says I'm a second cousin, but there's a lot more information out there to be found. So first of all, you talk about what are the basic facts. What are the things that you can squeeze out? Things like match names and administrators and locations and when they last signed in and what their genealogical expertise is. I mean, you definitely want to reach out to someone who says they're an expert genealogist and they signed on yesterday. That's a much more attractive person to work with than somebody who hasn't signed on in 3 years who's a beginner, right? Doesn't mean the beginner doesn't hold the family Bible, by the way. Doesn't mean that they don't have pictures of your great grandparents. It's just that if you're going for the gold, it's often best to start with people who have a higher potential, right? And then of course you're going to look at what the shared centimorgans are. What does that mean? If you have a match that's got 200 centimorgans, what are the likely matches? How could you be related to this person? Look at a tree. If there is one, maybe they have posted a tree. Does ancestry suggest a common ancestor or shared surnames, or do they have maps or ethnicity? We're going to talk through each one of these. And one last thing, check their user profile. This will help you with the approximate age and generation of the match. Now, remember, people were filled out their profiles when they signed up, right? So if someone signed up, 10 years ago, and they said they were 50, they're probably 60 now. People don't usually typically go in and change their ages. Who wants to age anyway? So just take that with a grain of salt, but it's important to know. I mean, if you're in your 20s and this match is in their 70s, it's going to give you an idea of a possible relationship. They're certainly not going to be your great niece. So that's an important component. Then you can also look at where they live, how active they are, what level of expertise they have. All of those things can help you identify whether a match is really worth pursuing. So let's deconstruct a match listing. So this is a match list, and we're going to try and get everything we can out of it. First of all, we're going to start with the match name. That's going to be there in that blue box. Sometimes it's a full name. Sometimes it's just initials. You want to look at whether it's administered by someone else. You can see the last one on here says managed by Melvin. So when you reach out, that means you're going to be reaching out to Melvin. You're not going to be reaching out to TS. Melvin's going to be the person at the other end of the email. So that's important because you're going to want to say you are a TS match because you don't know how many tests Melvin manages. I actually manage about 30 tests. And when somebody sends me an email that says, hey, we're a match, I'm like, who, who are you matching? I don't know. So you just need to make sure you're specific. The other thing is sometimes they use a name that they could use on other sites, and you actually might be able to Google that name and find out who they are. If their name is Dragon Catcher 795, Google Dragon Catcher 795. Maybe they're out there online and you can figure out who they are right away, because Dragon Catcher 75 isn't going to tell you anything as far as the DNA match is concerned, but you might be able to find them elsewhere. Next up is the relationship. So again, this is where I showed you the second or third cousin, in this case 210 centimorgans, and it's giving you some information that you need to analyze. Let's look at this a little bit more. If you click on that link where it says 210 centimorgans and 3% shared DNA, it pops up a box that looks like this. And this is an prediction, a relationship predictor, relationship calculator that calculates how you're related to this person. Remember, I told you there could be lots of different relationships based on the fact that 210 covers a broader array of relationships. And you can see in this case, it's got lots of different choices on it. One of the things you want to make sure you never forget to or overlook is half relationships, because half relationships are certainly out there, and in fact half relationships can be really helpful because it again divides in half the number of relatives you're going to have to be looking for. But for example, this one, again back to the 210 centimorgans, the longest segment's 39. There are 9 segments, but 39 is a big long one. It's not under 10, so that's good. And then what you want to do is you want to look at the relationship. So if I have identified that J Smith is, I'm 50 and J Smith is 70, then I would tell you that J Smith is probably not my half-great grandniece. So you can cross some of the relationships off right away if you know more about a person and they put information in their profile. Now, if they didn't put anything in their profile about their age, you might not know, but you probably would be able to tell if they were a half-great grandniece, because maybe you don't even have any great grandnieces. So it doesn't mean somebody's out there that's related to you that you don't know, but again, it's a conversation about what are the odds. So, this likely is a second cousin or a first cousin 2 times removed, that kind of thing. But dropping down to the bottom of the least likely, start with the most likely relationship. Don't automatically jump to, well, it's on the chart, so it's got to be that one down there. The most likely relationships are definitely at the top of this chart, but they will give you suggestions of how you could be related. The thing about this as well is that, funnily enough, this says that none of them are third cousins, right? It doesn't say that you're a third cousin with this person anywhere on the chart, but this happens to be my third cousin. So it doesn't mean that the chart actually contains all the relationships either. It's just that it's very unlikely that this is the relationship. It also brings to mind that maybe we're related in another way. So we'll talk about that. So then when you figure out how you're related to someone, you can actually edit the relationship. So it shows that you're a second or third cousin, and I can edit the relationship, and then I can pick from the drop down, which is in green. I can pick how I know we're related, right? So I'm going to drop it down and pick how I know it's related, how I know we're related. And that's a good thing. You want to identify your matches if you figured them out, because that feeds the algorithms on the back end at Ancestry or the other testing companies, and then they understand more about how people are related to you. For example, this one says that Jay Smith's on my paternal side. and I know how I'm related. So it then uses that information about Jay Smith and looks at Jay Smith's other matches and then can feed them to me with more precision about how we're related. So you do want to edit these relationships. It also cleans up your tree. You don't have these weird second to third cousins. If you figured out how you're related to someone, mark it down, and then you don't have to ever worry about what the relationship is again. The next thing, and probably the one column that most of us look for right away, is the tree column. This tells you if the person has a tree you can examine to determine relationships. There are a few options you'll see here. First and probably best is a public linked tree. That's a tree you can go directly to and look up, and it nicely will tell you how many people are on that tree. In this case, this one says 152 people. That's great. But there's also an unlinked tree. In this case, the bottom one says unlinked tree. What that will do for you is that will take you to a tree. So you'll be able to get to the tree, but it's not linked to the DNA test. So you don't know exactly where the person that you match is on the tree. I mean, this could be, in this case, it could be Melvin's tree. Melvin is the manager of this kit. So you could be going to Melvin's tree. You don't know where TS falls on Melvin's tree. So you can look for common ancestors there, but without it being linked, it's hard to tell. So again, there's no trees, there's public tree linked trees, there's private linked trees, there's unlinked trees. Obviously a public linked tree is the one that most of us are hoping for. One more tip, because there are public linked trees out there that you might get excited about, and when you click on them, they look like this. And for someone actively seeking connections, this is the most frustrating tree of all. It teases you into thinking there's information out there. This is a 7-person tree, but when you actually get there, there's nothing. Now, it's possible that the person who tested is in their 20s, and all of their parents and grandparents are all alive. That's what this indicates. The testing companies will not show you anyone that's living. So it's possible that that's their tree. But to fix this most frustrating experience for those of us who are doing DNA research, I have 3 suggestions. One, mark people as dead. If you put people on your tree, and even if you put dates in there, unless you put a death date or you mark them as deceased, they're going to show up as living. Unless, their birth date was in, 1825, then they're going to know they're not with us anymore. But they don't know. Maybe this person is 102 and they're still with us. So they're not going to mark people dead. You're going to have to do that. The second thing is, if this is your tree and all these people are living, please add another generation. Please add a 4th generation at least. And you should add, it's good practice for DNA matches. You should have 4 generations at least on your tree. Some people get worried about privacy. Believe me, they will not show anybody that's living. And if you're worried about too much information being shared, you can add a subset of your tree. You can add just straight line ancestors. You don't have to add siblings. You don't have to add descendants. Although I'll give you a reason later why you should. Those are things you can do if you have a tree that looks like this, to not give all of us who are doing research the excitement of a tree and then the downfall of, sorry, they're all private and you can't see anybody. That brings us to a conversation about public versus private trees. So let's talk about public trees. Everyone has an opinion on this. My personal choice is to have my tree public and searchable. I advocate for this. I believe you should unlock the gate and let people in. If you're on the fence, let me make a few points. One is, your ancestors are not just your ancestors. They're shared by all the descendants of those individuals. Brick wall breakthroughs come in surprising ways. You maximize the chance if you allow access to your tree. You might not know who out there sees your tree, sees their great grandmother on your tree, and goes, wow, Maybe they're interested in this family Bible that I have, or maybe they're interested in the genealogical research that my mother did that I don't care anything about. Um, and then the last reason is if something happens to you, all your research and hard work is still out there for others to review and use. So if you're thinking about leaving behind a legacy or what to do with your research, I advocate for people having a public tree with information on it so people can access it. Yes, there are things that people do. They steal pictures, et cetera, but back to point number one, they're not just your ancestors, they belong to all descendants. So ancestry, then, one of the things you can look for when you're examining your match list is ancestry kindly gives you this cute little icon, the three little people called common ancestors, to indicate they found what they think is a common ancestor between you and your match. So let's review. You're looking for common shared ancestors. The MRCA, or most recent common ancestor, is the ancestor between you and your match where you get to their trees and they meet in the middle, right? So you go up your line, they go up their line, and somewhere, and it has to happen because you share DNA, there is an individual or a couple that you share DNA with. That's on their tree and on your tree. So that's a common ancestor. And that's what you're looking for. You're looking for common shared ancestors that identify your connection with an individual match. But you have to have a tree linked to your DNA test to get this icon. So if you're like, they don't show me any common ancestors, and you probably don't have a tree linked to your DNA test, right? It doesn't have to be a public tree. It can be a private tree, but you have to link your DNA test to a tree. So that takes care of the unlinked tree problem, because then when somebody goes to your tree, they know exactly who you are. It goes right to you on that person's tree. So you want to see common ancestors, but you also need to understand that a common ancestor hint is that it's a hint. They don't really know how you're related. They just have gone out to your tree and your match's tree, or they've gone out to your tree and other trees and matched up and have identified that this person is a descendant of people out there that are on trees, and you have a common ancestor. So these are hints. They should not be taken as gospel that that's how you're related, but they're really good hints. But they also might be able to give you further information about how you're related to someone. So here's an example of two common ancestors. So these folks showed up. They show up for matches with both public and private searchable trees. And you can see the little common ancestor. When you go to the match and side-by-side comparison for a person with one of those icons, it looks like this. So in this case, this is myself and C. C is a cousin of mine. And you can see that there is a shared ancestor there on the left in the green box. It shows that I am likely related to C through my common ancestors, Nicholas Powers and Bridget Skeins. And you notice that it says, according to ancestry member trees. And we know ancestry member trees can be faulty. There are certainly people out there who are what we call name collectors, who accept every hint that ancestry gives them and then have trees that have 50,000 people in them. And honestly, they're not valid trees. They don't have the solid research to go with them. They just have accepted every source that came along, and they could have people on their tree who aren't even related to them. So, just take it all with a grain of salt. But this is an interesting one because you can see here, it shows you that my common ancestors with C are these two people. But if you look at C's tree, which is on the right, you see the red box. There is nothing on here to the left, to the right of her tree. There's certainly no Nicholas Powers and no Bridget Skeins. So how do they know that I'm related through Bridget and Nicholas? Because of other people's trees, not because of C's trees. They've identified through other people's trees that it's likely that these are our common ancestors, right? If C had filled out her tree further, she would have taken the bottom person on here, Elsie Powers, and added that Elsie Powers' parents are Nicholas and Bridget. Elsie happens to be the sister of my grandmother. So Yes, we are related through Nicholas and Bridget in this case, but they found that relationship someplace else, not from C. She does not have it on her tree at all. Now let's scroll down a bit more. So we're on the same match page as I just showed you, where it showed you her tree and the common ancestors, etc. So if you scroll down, um, this one will then show you a listing of shared surnames between your tree and the matches tree. Now, just be aware, shared surnames on your matches tree could be in-laws, it could be daughter-in-laws, it could be other people who you're not related to. But since we're, looking for ancestors of certain surnames, if we're focused, it can be very helpful to find that you have shared surnames between your matches trees. You can click on any name. In this case, I clicked on the name Maynard, and you can see side by side the comparison of who is on the matches tree and who is on my tree. So this happens to be my husband's tree, and it shows that Edna Maynard, Isaac Maynard, and Robert Maynard are on both trees. Interestingly enough, my tree does not have any birth or death dates for Isaac Maynard. I don't have those on my tree, but this tree does. So I might want to go out and look at that tree and see what sources are there. How do they have that birth and death information? Do they have sources for it that I could evaluate to put on my tree? Maybe. So that can be a really big help. Again, this came from a match, DNA match. So this is not other genealogical record research. It leads you to genealogical records research, but it's giving you those hints based on a DNA match between my husband and a cousin of his. Certainly taking a look at the shared surname list is important. Now, I do want you to know that these numbers are halved. So it says Maynard 6 people. The 6 people are 3 people on your tree and 3 people on your matches tree. So it's not 6 Maynards individuals, it's 3 Maynards. So the number is basically in half. So you can see for Pruitt, it's going to show 1 Pruitt on their tree and 1 Pruitt on your tree. So just so you know that that's how those things work. But again, they're great clues on how you are related to a match. The next thing is you scroll down further on a page and you get a comparison match of geographic locations for your ancestors. And this is going to be a comparison of the locations for you and locations for your match. And location can be really helpful. I mean, if your mother's from Pennsylvania and your dad's from California, this could be a great clue because you're going to be looking for California matches and they're more likely to be related to your father than to your mother. And these are ancestral locations. So it's where your ancestors are, birth locations, I believe. And you can see here when you click on it that in this case, this is my husband's tree. And this happens to be Eastern Kentucky. So it shows that he has 2 people on his tree that were born in Martin County, Kentucky. And the match has 1 person on their tree, also born in Martin County, Kentucky. And it happens to be the same person that's on my husband's tree. So you can see just by looking at ancestral locations. Now, if you're doing research like my brick wall, is we talked about earlier, is in Newfoundland. I'm looking for people who actively have Newfoundland on their tree. Newfoundland is a more specific location. I mean, if you have ancestors from Virginia, you're going to have a ton of matches that have ancestors from Virginia, nowhere near where you're from, potentially. If you're trying to narrow down one branch of your tree, looking for an ancestral location can be very helpful. All of this detail is from your matches and your match list and the information you get on your matches. So I encourage you to just continue to squeeze out all the juice that you can get from all your match information that can help you advance your DNA and your genealogical research. Because all of this leads you ultimately to genealogical records and sources. Okay, so that's an overview of matching. I'm now going to go through, as I mentioned, what I call a DNA potpourri, which is covering some of the most common questions I get when I do my classes. First up, the most common thing I get is I don't know any of these names on these trees. I go into a match and I have no idea who these people are, so I don't recognize any of these names. And I'm just going to give you a quick overview on why that's true. Because I do hear this all the time. I don't see any names I know on their tree. I open their tree and there's no names I know. So let's walk through this a bit, right? So we're going to take David Smith as our home person. He is our test taker. He is us, if you will. And he is looking for DNA matches. And his Smith lineage is pretty clear. He's the son of Ben Smith, the grandson of John Smith Jr., the great grandson of John and Sally Smith, right? So he knows his Smith lines. He's going to be looking for Smiths. Smiths aren't the issue. It's all the other names he doesn't see. But if you go back up to his great grandparents, John and Sally, John had one son, they had one son and four daughters. They had Sally Smith, Nancy Smith, Mary Smith, and Elizabeth Smith. Good common names. Each of those women married someone, and each of them had, in this case, one child who also had one child. We know that's never going to be the case. They're all going to have more kids than that, likely, particularly historically. So you're going to have a lot of folks who had children, and all of those four sisters of John Smith Jr. have new names now. There's Sally Jones and Nancy Brown and Mary Johnson and Elizabeth Kelly. And they then had kids. And if you know Sally Jones had a son, he's going to be John Jones. But if the others all had daughters, you're going to have Betsy Brown Klein, Sally Johnson Wilson. Oh, maybe there's another son. You have David Kelly. And then one more generation, and you get to Kathy Jones Miller, Gail Klein Walsh, Marcia Wilson Garcia, Kathy Kelly Lee. You have 11 more names beyond Smith. And this is a very simplified tree. Guaranteed one of those sisters had 4 or 5 kids. So if you add 11 surnames, it really takes only 2 generations for you to get to the point where you don't recognize any names. I mean, is David Smith going to recognize Kathy Kelly Lee? Probably not. He's not going to have a clue who that person is. And that person's only his second cousin. And in big families, second cousins could be very far away. So you have 11 additional surnames. So how do you deal with that? First of all, one of them is to have a complete tree. So tree completeness is a measure of how complete your tree is. And there's kind of 2 ways to look at tree completeness, but the main one, and I'll go to the slide right now, is that you have filled in all of your parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, second great-grandparents, etc. This is a great chart. You can create this with an account at DNA Painter, or you can do it manually. It just shows how many of your ancestors you have identified. And that's a measure of tree completeness. If your match happens to match you where the blue arrow is at your third great-grandparent level, and you are missing 7 of your third great-grandparents, it could be one of those 7 that is the match, how you match that person. And you don't know who they are, so you're never going to know who this match is. So working on tree completeness is very important to help. But in addition to that, adding siblings and descendants is important. As I showed you on the previous chart with the Smith family, if I hadn't put in John Jr.'s sisters and their descendants, so siblings and descendants, I would never have figured out how that match is located. So I encourage you to have a complete tree, add siblings of your ancestors, add the descendants of your ancestors' siblings, so that you can really identify your DNA matches. And the more complete your tree is from a descendancy perspective, the more likely it is you're going to have a match. And by the way, if you keep that tree publicly at some place like Ancestry, the more likely is you're going to get those common ancestor matches, and the system's going to tell you how you're related to your match. The other thing I recommend to people is to keep a list of surnames. You're going to come across a match and it's going to say Wilson on it, and you're going to go, Wilson. I think I have a Wilson. Do I have a Wilson? I've been researching for 40 years. There's probably a Wilson out there, but I don't know. So rather than try and figure it out and scramble to find it, if you have a list and you've identified your matches with those surnames, then you certainly are that much further ahead. The next question I get often is, how do I get my matches to respond? So this is about writing to matches and connecting with matches, which I strongly recommend. A lot of people get frustrated by this process and don't want to do it, but some of my best DNA breakthroughs have come through people responding to my inquiries and my match letters. So let's talk about how to get someone to answer you. I encourage you to do your homework first. That's review the match the way we talked about it. Understand all the components of the match. Know where this person lives and what their level of expertise is, and what do you know about this match? Are there shared locations? Are there shared ethnicities? What do you know about the match? Do your homework first. Don't make assumptions. Don't say I know how we're related. You certainly can say I believe we're related, but don't make assumptions. And that's important because if the match doesn't know that they're related to you, or they don't know that they're related to a grandparent that maybe they don't know is their grandparent or not their grandparent, you don't want to, kind of just bombard them with that information. So you can say, I believe, and they should be able to respond appropriately. Be friendly. You know, don't be overly demanding. Just be friendly. Friendly is very important. Tell them how to reach you. If you have an email address that you're willing to give to them, or you can create an email address for your DNA research, tell them how to reach you directly. The mailing systems at the websites are not great. They don't remind you, etc. So just tell them how to reach you directly. Tell them why you're reaching out to them. I've done research. I think you're on my Smith Jones line. I have Smiths from this location. I would really like to compare notes. So tell them why you're reaching out to them, not just I think we're cousins. That's way too broad. Tell them how you found them. I found you on Ancestry when I was looking for my Smith line. And make sure you also tell them who you're reaching out to. That's the example I gave where you have 30 matches and Melvin gets a letter and it says we're a match, and match to who. So make sure you say, I found CC online and I think CC and I are cousins and I would like to connect, right? Give something to get something. So you don't have to give it right away, but you can say, hey, I have grandma's Bible, or I have photos of my great grandparents, or if you'd like them, you can't send, you can't add images to the email systems anyway. But if you have something like that, give something and you might get a better return. If you're helping someone else, say that. I'm helping my sister-in-law find her grandparents, for example. People like to help people who are, in need, right? So create a need that people can help with. But don't hesitate to ask for something. Please tell me your surnames that you're researching in Newfoundland. I would love to know if any of these names resonate with you. Could you get back to me, etc. Use the notes field in your matches to track your contact. I reached out on January 25th, 2025. I told them I was, a Powers match. I'd love to hear more. And then don't give up. Keep trying. People will say you'll hear from 10 to 20% of your matches, and certainly don't dwell on those who you don't hear from. But don't give up, because when you sent an email, you had no idea what was going on in that person's life. So it could be the week of their daughter's wedding. Their husband could be in the hospital. They could have just broken their arm. You have no idea what's good. They could have just lived through a hurricane. Been there, done that this year. So I think that you should not be discouraged by someone not answering. So wait a couple weeks. Don't wait 2 days. Wait a couple weeks and send them another note saying, "Hey, I sorry if you missed this. I definitely love to connect. Be friendly, be nice. Don't be too pushy, but don't give up. Don't just say, "Oh, they never answered." And then after that second try, then maybe you give it 6 months or a year before you try again. I have someone I write to kind of once a year, and because I really want to connect with them, and never have heard from them, but I don't give up. I keep trying. And by the way, if you're someone who has an inquiry from somebody else who sent you a note 2 or 3 years ago, it is never too late to answer. I have gotten replies from people I wrote to 4 years ago. So it is never, ever too late to reply. Don't stress over it. Don't apologize for it. Just respond. People will be thrilled. Trust me. So the next kind of Q&A that I often get is, why don't I share DNA with? So this is a conversation about not only who you might match or who you might not match, but then the second corollary question is, why are my siblings different from me? So let's start with siblings. This is a very high level overview. It is not at all how it really happens. It happens at the microscopic level with small segments of DNA, but I'm just going to show you in general how it works. So a father has 2 chromosomes. In this case, you see blue and yellow. A woman has 2 chromosomes, red and green. They both contribute to a offspring after recombination, which happens before an egg or sperm are created, and they recombine into new chromosomes. So in this case, you see there's two. There's a new chromosome coming from the father. One of them is yellow on top and blue on the bottom. The other is blue on top, yellow on the bottom. They're not equal. They are often very different from each other. They could also be very much the same as each other. That happens in the recombination process. And the mother contributes the same thing, portion of each side of her chromosomes. This is just one segment of one chromosome as an example, but you can see what happens here. During the recombination process, child 2 got a chromosome in this section of her DNA that is red on the top and green on the bottom, and the other child has green on the top and red on the bottom. So they do not have the same DNA. You get 50% of your DNA from your mother and 50% of your DNA from your father, but it's not the same 50%. So you can see right here exactly that these 2 children, offspring of the same mother and the same father, got completely different components of DNA. And again, this is a gross overgeneralization, just so you can understand. And then you go one more generation, and child number 2 gets married. Then their spouse has the same thing, 2 chromosomes, one on each pair of chromosomes, one for each. And they then create their offspring. And you can see that in this case, the grandchild is part of the mother, which is the pink and purple, and part of the father, which is red, blue, and yellow. And what do you see here? There's actually no green, right? Because in the recombination process, all the green washed out. Now, it does not happen in 2 generations like this. It can happen in 4 generations, but it does not happen in 2 generations. So it's just an example to help you understand that over time, you get less and less components of your ancestors as you continue to add new DNA in each generation. So siblings get 50% from their mother and 50% from their father. It's just it can be a very different 50%. And that's why, you have blonde hair and your brother has brown hair. And that's why, you have freckles and your brother doesn't. All of that is just different components of your parents' DNA that you got or you didn't get. And the next part of that is, so why don't I share any DNA with? So let's talk about first, you will always share DNA with your parents, your children, your grandchildren, your siblings, your aunts and uncles, your grandparents, your great-grandparents, your first cousins, and your second cousins. So all of those people you will share DNA with. If you have a first cousin that tests a DNA and you do not share DNA with them, something's going on. Because you definitely should share with your first cousin. So, you both have in common, you are the children of siblings, and those siblings have the same parents, and so you should definitely have DNA that you share with a first cousin. So, often on some of the Facebook groups, people are going, I don't share any DNA with this person, or I don't share any DNA with that person. It is often a problem with in parentage, just so you know. But beyond this level, beyond these folks you will always share DNA with, there is a group of people you won't necessarily share DNA with. So you won't share at all any DNA with 10% of your third cousins. So 90% of your third cousins you'll share DNA with, but 10% of your third cousins you won't at all. I actually have a third cousin who I do not share any DNA with. He shares DNA with my aunt, whose test I manage. So I have done the relationship, so I'm positive he's a third cousin, but he does not match me at all. So he's that 1 in 10 that I don't that doesn't end up with DNA that I share. 54% of your fourth cousins won't match with you, and 85% of your fifth cousins won't match with you. Now, that right there, that 85% of your fifth cousins won't match with will tell you why it's so much harder to do DNA research back multiple generations. Because if you have, if you're looking for a third or fourth great grandparent, you have to have so many more matches, so many more cousins in the database to find what you're looking for, because 85% of your fifth cousins will not match you at all. So that only leaves you with 15%, and there have to be an awful lot of folks for you to get that 15%. So that's why it's harder to do DNA research back multiple generations. Doesn't mean there aren't people out there, and doesn't mean that you can't figure out how to get around that problem. Because, by the way, that's why you should test all of your siblings, because again, they're going to get 50% of your parents' DNA that you didn't get, or they're going to get at least 25% of their DNA that they have that you don't have, and so you can use them to find their 15% of their fifth cousins for that particular component. So there's ways to get around this 85%. It just means you need a lot more matches, both on your level and folks who are back that far. Okay, so then we're going to talk about multiple relationships, pedigree collapse, endogamy, and consanguinity. Multiple relationships. You can be related to a match in more than one way. The most common multiple relationship is when siblings marry siblings. For example, your grandfather's sister marries your grandmother's brother. There's nothing wrong with that. They're not related to each other. It just happens that now your grandfather's sister and your grandmother's brother are married, and what happens is then that their parents are in your tree, in that person's tree. The offspring of those people have those grandparents in their tree more than once. This is not pedigree collapse or endogamy. It's simply a double relationship. So the pedigree collapse, which we'll talk about next, will be for the descendants of those people. But for you, looking at cousins, for you, it's just that you are a double. It's a double relationship. So in this case, you have a double first cousin. They're a cousin on your grandfather's side, and they're a cousin on your grandmother's side. And so you are related to them twice. But it does impact how much DNA you share. And let me give you an example. So this is my husband's match, Beverly, who shows up as 206 centimorgans across 11 segments. And they are in the second cousin range for this number. So okay, Beverly's a second cousin. I should be able to figure out how they're related. The problem is that this is my husband's father's tree. So Beverly's related to my husband's father's side, and Beverly's family is I figured out how Beverly is related to my husband. Luckily, Beverly has a really nice tree, and I have a pretty good tree for my husband. So this is what we found. Starting out, Edna Maynard, who is my father-in-law's grandmother, married a guy named Elias Jude, and her sibling married someone on Beverly's ancestry tree, right? So that's how we're related. It was a sibling of Edna who married Beverly's ancestor. So that makes the common ancestors Robert Maynard and Lavinia Smith Pruitt. Lavinia Susan Pruitt, which would make them a third cousin. So 206 centimorgans is a lot for a third cousin. So I thought, well, maybe there must be more. And son of a gun, on his father's mother's side, his father's mother's mother, you have a sibling of his father's grandmother married to a sibling on Beverly's tree. So again, another common set of ancestors, Andrew Scott and Elizabeth Lynch. So another third cousin. So two third cousins. And here you go, one more. Um, if you go back another generation, Nathaniel Brown and Rebecca Stanley are also related to Beverly through a sibling of Fountain Lowe's, who married onto Beverly's tree. Now, Beverly's ancestors aren't on here, and they are the ones in yellow, but they come through siblings of three of my husband's ancestors. So that means they're a third cousin, and a fourth cousin. So this isn't endogamy. This isn't anything else. It's not pedigree collapse. It's just multiple relationships. And in this case, an average third cousin is 73 centimorgans. So you have two third cousins and a fourth cousin, which averages 35 centimorgans, and you add those together and you get 181, which is pretty close to the 204 that he is actually related to her in, certainly within the margin of error, although it's possible that maybe there's even one more relationship out there at the fifth cousin level that's adding a few more centimorgans in here. But certainly not a second cousin. And even though it shows up that he should share 204 centimorgans and it should be a second cousin, it's really not. Says because DNA is additive in this case. So you add together the various relationships to get to how you get to that number. But that also means you're looking further back on the tree. You're looking for connections of ancestors further back on your tree than you might otherwise have looked. So that's multiple relationships. Next up is pedigree collapse. So pedigree collapse is when you have a set of ancestors appearing in your tree more than once or multiple times. So instead of 32 unique third great grandparents, you would have 30 or 28. This happens when cousins marry. So it's the offspring of this couple that would show the mutual ancestor twice on their trees. This refers to the ancestor tree of an individual collapsing or not having the full complement of 32 or 64 or 128 unique ancestors. This also impacts the DNA you share with matches if they are impacted by pedigree collapse, because again, you could get DNA from that ancestor in two different ways. Finally, endogamy. Endogamy is when a population marries exclusively within a confined group over and over across multiple generations. No new DNA is introduced, and over time, everyone in the population has segments of DNA in common with the entire population. So groups can be confined by religion, by geography, by social or societal norms. Examples often cited are Ashkenazi Jews or Akkadians or Polynesians or similar populations where for a variety of reasons, they have been in a confined group where they have only married within that group. But endogamy is a long-term issue. It's not just a few generations. We're talking many generations. And the result for a modern DNA test taker is if you're from an endogamous population, you have a very large number of matches with all of them having numerous small segments. And then these segments add up to what looks like a match, much like the third and fourth cousin example, but multiplied times 10. So a match it looks a lot closer than they are. So it's a 4 centimorgan plus a 4 centimorgan plus a 7 centimorgan plus a 9 centimorgan. All those things get added together. And the rule of thumb for those with endogamy in their pedigree is to look for matches with large individual segments and use non-endogamous matches to tease out relationships. And we can certainly talk about that a bit more if you're interested. And finally, the concept of consanguinity. Consanguinity is really a measure of blood relationship. You should think of it like 6 degrees of separation from Kevin Bacon. The Catholic Church decreed in the 1200s that people should not marry closer than 4 degrees of separation. 4 degrees of separation is first cousins. And they instituted marriage bans. So for historical reference, this is where marriage bans came from. Marriage bans were pre-marriage public announcements to ensure that there were no issues with the couple marrying, that there was no closer degrees of separation. And this was particularly important to the settlers of early Quebec, the Acadian populations, since the total population was small and they did not marry outside of the group. And this is a degree of consanguinity chart that's from the legacy tree genealogists, that shows kind of how all of that is identified and what 3 degrees or 6 degrees or 4 degrees of separation is. So let's wrap up with a conversation about DNA tools to enhance your journey. I just want to cover a few DNA tools here, but to give you an overview, over time, the entire ecosystem developed in the DNA world to provide supplemental tools and techniques for effectively analyzing and utilizing DNA test results. Some of these third-party solutions were developed by technically savvy individuals. When DNA testing started, they really just gave you ethnicity information. It took a while for them to even give you additional shared matches. But these technically savvy individuals, often people doing it in their garage or at night, develop some really great third-party tools. And they were readily adopted by the genealogy community. But while they were slow to come to the party, the testing companies figured out that they needed these tools built within their own websites, and they started to add tools to their websites. And some of the third-party tools are no longer. They don't exist anymore. They don't need to. An example is the colored dots system that Ancestry allows you to use to identify your matches. Blaine Bettinger actually developed a dot system well before Ancestry did, but it's not necessarily now because it's built within their own system. So over time, third-party tools came in, they went out, some were absorbed, new ones were developed. The companies have gotten very much more sophisticated. They're continuing to add tools, which is bumping out external providers. They can show you matches of matches now, and they can identify paternal and maternal matches for you. And with the dawn of AI, I think there's going to be even more sophisticated tools out there. But there are a few really strong third-party tools that are worth knowing that still exist, that are worth exploring. So if you're doing DNA research, you might want to learn more about these. But some of the tools today from the testing companies, except for Ancestry, they have chromosome browsers, which can be very helpful in identifying where on a chromosome you match someone. So you can do that, am I matching them just because it's at the same spot, or do all three of us match together? Match-to-match relationships is been out there at 23andMe and MyHeritage, but it is now at Ancestry with the Pro Tools, and it is probably the #1 biggest revelation in the last year to help people with their DNA research. One of the bloggers wrote, finally a reason to pay for Pro Tools because you get the match-to-match relationships, which is really, really helpful. Maternal and paternal indicators, chromosome painters, which is not the same thing as a browser. It basically tells you where the sections of your chromosomes came from ethnically. So it'll show you your Irish segments and your Italian segments. Triangulation indicators will help you definitively identify the three of you all share DNA at the exact same spot on the same side of your chromosome. XDNA, which is inherited, women inherit 2 X chromosomes from both of their parents, and men inherit an X chromosome from their mother. And that DNA, while it's tested at Ancestry, isn't provided at Ancestry, but you can get it in a download. It is shown at Family Tree DNA, and you can use it at GEDmatch. Haplogroups give you an idea of where your long-term ancestry is from. It can help with identification of Native American ancestry or African ancestry. And then you can also upload and download your DNA test data. You cannot upload at Ancestry or 23andMe, but you can certainly download and take it someplace else. And a good reason to play in all the ponds. The tools that I encourage you to explore further on the third-party side, tools that aren't built into the testing companies' websites. Probably my favorite is DNA Painter. It's a terrific website. He's got some wonderful tools for a tree analysis. It's got some great relationship calculator tools. It also is the home of What Are the Odds, which is Watto, which is on here, which helps you calculate, statistically how you might be related to someone. Banyan DNA is one of the new tools in the last year. Leah Larkin, who's the DNA geek, is on a mission to solve the endogamy problem through her website, and she certainly has got multiple relationships covered. So she's making progress. Genetic Affairs is a site where you can use a downloaded match list from Family Tree DNA, or if you have it from someplace else, you can upload it to Genetic Affairs. They have some really nice analysis tools. GEDmatch, which I talked about earlier, allows you to use your test results from any company and compare it to folks from any other company if they've uploaded their results there. DNA GEDcom allows you to download your Ancestry and 23andMe data and into a database that you can do analysis with. GDAT does a great job of helping you organize and track your matches from multiple companies. Borland Genetics is great if you're trying to look at unknown parentage cases. And there are many more out there, but those are the ones that I think are particularly useful and worth exploring. And again, this list is in your handout and more, so you can check it out further. And with that, I am happy to end the slideshow and take any questions you might have.
All right. Thank you so much, Peggy. That was another great presentation. So we've got some questions from our audience. In your opinion, what is the best DNA company? Like, would you go with Ancestry or 23andMe, or is it more of a subjective type of a question?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends. I would tell you that, people ask me, where should I go first? I always say Ancestry, because it is the largest database. They unfortunately don't have some of the best analysis tools. So if you really want to do segment analysis or things like that, then you need to go someplace else. 23andMe has been having some challenges in the last year and a half. And so, I wouldn't recommend it right now until they kind of can figure out what they're, sorting out their challenges. But if you're interested in health issues, that is the best place to go. If you have international ancestors, if your folks are more recently here from Eastern Europe or something like that, or you're doing research across the pond, MyHeritage is the most international of the group. And then, of course, if you're doing specialty DNA, mitochondrial DNA, Y-DNA, that kind of thing, then family tree DNA is the place to go. So it really depends on what your research challenge is.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And so when you send your DNA to several DNA companies, would each company come back with the same results in theory? Or I guess depending on if they're looking for different things, that would pull up
Yeah,
different
well,
things.
so you don't really have to test everywhere. You can test at Ancestry and 23andMe, but if you want to, use MyHeritage or Family Tree DNA, you can download your test results from someplace else and upload there. So first of all, you don't have to test everywhere. You just have to have your DNA there. But then, people often say, well, they say I'm 75% Scandinavian and this company says I'm 25% Scandinavian. Why are they so different? Well, it has to do with their reference populations. It's who they're comparing you to. So it depends on who's in their database. I will tell you that I'm 50% Swedish. My father is 100% Swedish. All of his ancestors came from Sweden. But one of them tells me, this is no lie, one of them tells me I'm 75% Scandinavian, and one of them tells me I'm 25% Scandinavian. So, a lot of people tell you that the ethnicity portion of it is kind of good at the continental level. So Europe, yeah, I'm European. But don't get hung up on the granularity of that. So, a lot of people test to get that number, and then, they're trying to figure out why it's different. It has to do with who they're comparing you to.
No, that makes sense. Any tips for navigating sensitive matches, like a relative who was put up for adoption and you both find out via the DNA testing and you match on Ancestry?
Yeah, that's a tough one. And there's something like, people say the numbers are, varied. So something like 5% people will have a surprise, which doesn't sound like a big number. When you're talking about 20 million testers, that's actually a lot of people. And so, yes, so it is definitely something that people need to be prepared for. You need to go into it with a lot of sensitivity. There are some websites out there and there's some Facebook groups that are specifically helpful for people with that situation, both on the I'm really having trouble with this side, so the kind of more mental health side, and
Mhm.
how do I reach out to people? How do I connect with people? What do I do? So I would just make sure that you're doing some, really good Google searches to give yourself all the information before you don't jump is my first piece of advice. Don't automatically just write the letter and go, you are my grandfather. Yeah, don't go there first. Do some preparation.
Yeah, no, I thought you had some really good advice and some really good tips and you're kind of connecting with a match and how to get them to respond to you and to not make assumptions and to kind of go into it softer instead of, hey, you're my cousin. Like that's gonna throw some people off, especially if they didn't know that they were adopted or know that they had any, issues or in their family tree. So it's a good reminder to just kind of go easy, go slow.
Yep.
Um, and then I think this question was in regards to the screenshots from your presentation. What site were those from?
My match lists were all from
Yeah,
Ancestry.
from Ancestry. Okay. That's what that looked like to me, but I wanted to double check. I did not want to assume. So another question, my father is 85, and I wonder if you would recommend getting a DNA test for him before he passes. I know he will have
Oh,
different DNA than I do, but I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts on that?
definitely, definitely, definitely. The people you need to test first are the oldest population in your family, because they're the most likely to be gone. And particularly if they're a generation or even two generations above you, they're going to have DNA that you don't have that will match people who are, much further back. We talked about how 85% of your fifth cousins won't match you. Well, they have that DNA for all those fifth cousins because they're third cousin level, right? So, yes, as many tests as you can afford. Get all your older people to test.
No, that's a great point. Thank you. Another question, how accurate are low percentage ethnicity matches? For instance, if I had 1 to 5% Swedish, I heard they're irrelevant, but where do they come from? But I guess you kind of answered this a little bit with your thing of kind of depending on the pool of the rest of the people that you're being tested with.
Yeah, it's also make sure you click on that because often they'll give you a range, right? So it'll give you a number, but then there's also a range. So maybe it says that you're 7%, but maybe the range is 0 to 10. Well, that means possibility is that it's zero, right? So, but those low ethnicity can be interesting if it's an ethnicity that's unique, right? So let's say I'm 100% Italian, but I'm 10% Swedish, right? So I'm going to be looking for Swedish matches because if I'm trying to do Swedish research, I mean, all the rest of it, I'm going to be doing Italian research, but it also depends on your research question. So if your research question happens to be on a component of yours that is a minor ethnicity, then you want to look for the matches that have that ethnicity.
Another question, what worksheets do you favor when you're working on your ancestry or your genealogy? Are there any like go-to worksheets that you use?
I do everything on my computer, so I don't do anything, manually, if you will. I use Airtable and Excel a lot. But Family Tree Magazine has a number of worksheets that you can download for free that you might want to check out.
Okay, thank you. Another question, would you explain the match to match relationship tool?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So what a match-to-match relationship tool is, you have a list of matches, and then you click on shared matches, and so it brings up another set of matches, right? So you have your matches, and then you have the matches that you and this person share. So let's say you're at the top, all of these matches are yours, and then it shows Sally as one of your matches. It will then also show you all the people that both you and Sally match. So that's matches of matches, right? So all the people that you match and Sally match and that you match in common. But now the new thing that's so exciting is it'll not only give you that whole list of people, but it'll tell you exactly how Sally matches those people. It didn't used to. It just told you who you matched in common. But now it will tell you how Sally matches them. Down to the centimorgan level, it'll say, okay, you match Sally, Sally matches Joe. Joe is Sally's father. Joe is Sally's sister. It'll tell you that information. So now you've got a family grouping, or now you have, maybe you knew Joe, but you don't know Sally. And so now you figured out who Sally is because you already knew who Joe was. And it told you that Sally's his daughter. So the matches of matches really kind of ties it all together to tell you how your matches and your shared matches match each other.
Yeah,
I
thank
hope
you.
I explained that well enough.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Another question, of the third-party DNA tools on that list, is there one that could offer an actual person that can explore unexpected DNA matches? After a lot of research, I've been able to determine how I'm probably related, but I want to know the exact match, meaning great aunt versus half aunt. It's making my brain hurt, and my new DNA matches want to know also.
Well, there isn't a tool on there necessarily that would do that, but I would encourage you to join a DNA special interest group, because that's what those groups are for. And many genealogical societies have them. Some of them have them that are, free for anyone to join. There are a number of them out there, but that's my best advice is to go to a special interest group and have them help you.
Awesome, thank you. I think see, we have another question of like which DNA test to use, and I think you kind of answered that a little bit earlier. Um, it kind of depends on what your goal is. If you're looking for more the medical, then it would more likely be the 23andMe. And then let's see. I think we had a couple of comments. Of when you were talking about connecting to matches, someone commented that they've mailed photos to ancestors or to, relatives of ancestors that they've matched with on their tree. They kind of felt that the people that they matched with would be more, entitled or more likely to enjoy the photos of the relatives than this person would be. And then another comment that they're great friends with a fourth cousin they found through Ancestry, and they're not even a DNA match, but they know they're related and how they're related, and they have a lot of fun researching. So this is a great way to kind of
Yeah,
make connections and make new friends, new
I have
family
made
members.
some amazing discoveries through reaching out to matches, no question. I have a photograph of my great grandfather. I'd never seen a picture of him. Someone sent me who's a match. I have a family history that was written back in the 1930s from a match. I mean, there's some great stuff out there. And, you're always looking for who has the family Bible. Somebody out there has it. You just have to find them. So you got to reach out to all those second and third cousins.
Absolutely. That's a great point. I think that might be it for our questions. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us tonight. And of course, a big thank you to Peggy Jude. What a wonderful presentation. As a reminder, all three of our Genealogy Week performances will be recorded and will be available along with the handouts at hcplonline.org for the next few weeks. Our Genealogy Week programs continue tomorrow, Tuesday, January 28th, as Lisa Listen presents Walk Where Your Ancestors Walked, Virtual Heritage Travel Using AI and Online Resources. Then on Thursday, January 30th, join us for usingfamilysearch.org, a free genealogy resource website. You can register for both programs on our website, and we hope to see you there. Don't forget to take time to complete the quick survey after the credits. We use your input to help us choose our topics for our virtual genealogy programs, so it'll just take a minute of your time, and we really appreciate it. Thank you, and have a great rest of your week.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.